Melbourne Cocktail Festival is a really great step forward in terms of really coming together
to build health and resilience in the industry.
We see this significant change in a mixology world and a coffee world.
Because we don't have this prescribed educational path, we all really have to build that curriculum, to build that education, much like we were doing today.
So using these digital tools, we can understand the ergonomics, the efficiency and the metrics of the bar, and then also start to collaborate worldwide.
We're learning about the importance of mental health, sustainability for our bodies, our minds, for the produce that we use.
Honest and inclusive connection makes everything, including what's in your glass, taste better.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm the wine director at Attica, as Orlando said. Obviously, there are lots of commonalities between our industries, wine and cocktail, alcohol certainly, although that's not really the subject of my talk today. Hospitality and service is a huge part of what we do. And I will circle back to that, but where I'm going to start is talking about the pursuit of excellence and how that is a bit unique in our field. Obviously, the pursuit of excellence is something that exists in every field, but in most professions, it kind of is in line with job performance. And you know, if you look at an athlete, the better they are, the more excellent they are at their work, the more games they win, and thus fulfilling their job performance. With stockbrokers, the more money they make. With firefighters, the more lives they save. And this may be a bit of an oversimplification, but in general, kind of these two things run parallel. And I think that's where we're a bit different. I think when we kind of come up in this industry, the things that we hold as these are the qualities that make a superlative bartender or sommelier are actually not always things that make us better at our jobs. And in fact, I think sometimes this ruthless pursuit of excellence can make us worse industry professionals. So that's kind of the thesis of today. But first, I'll start by telling you guys a bit about myself. So I grew up in Northern California, pretty standard childhood. I went off to college and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I studied business for a bit. I studied English literature, which I really liked, and I thought I can make a career in this. So I took a year off after college to write applications to PhD programs to go back into academia. But I needed a job in that interim year. I was kind of scrolling through the classifieds and I saw a listing to work in a wine shop, and I thought, well, that'll be fun. I like wine. I don't know much about it. I was 21 at the time. But hey, let's give it a go. So they gave me the job. I'm not to this day exactly sure why, but I started working in wine and I really loved it. And it appealed to me in a lot of different ways. You know, it is very academic, very intellectual, but also very social, lots of applications for education, very experiential, related to senses, and I really loved all these things. So, you know, within the year, I knew I wasn't going to send in my grad school applications, and I wanted to pursue a career in wine. But unlike kind of the academic path laid before me, there wasn't this prescribed education for becoming an expert sommelier, or really just a sommelier. And that's when I found the Court of Master Sommeliers. This is a certifying body. It started in the UK in the 1960s and then came over to the US in the 1980s. There are 4 levels: introductory, certified, advanced, and masters. And I really kind of was attracted to this structure. But, you know, soon as I started taking the exams, there was a cultural aspect of it that I didn't really enjoy. And with the exams, with competitions that surrounded them, there was kind of this gamification of being a sommelier, of learning about wine, that I really didn't like. You know, things like name every minimum must wait for every predicate level, for every grape, for every Anbaugebiete of Germany. Name the 9 subzones of Vino Verde. Name every declared port vintage of all time. These were kind of the different facts and trivia that were thrown around in tasting groups and you know, online forums. And early in my career, I really didn't know what was relevant and what wasn't. And on top of that, kind of what I was witnessing is how this culture, this kind of aggressive knowledge acquisition and kind of competitive nature was actually making us worse at our jobs. And really at the expense mainly of hospitality. So I saw this in a few major ways. The first was wine list curation. So the choices that sommeliers were making to put on their wine lists were all about kind of the nerdiest, the geekiest wines, the most elite, the cult wines, instead of wines that really appealed to a broad spectrum of our guests. You know, if someone walks into Attica and asks me for a Barossa Shiraz, I don't want to tell them that their only options are Mondouse, Schioppettino, and Blaufränkisch. That's not hospitality. The second, which relates, is wine list recommendations. So, you know, many conversations I've witnessed amongst sommeliers before service, not with my team at Attica, but other places, people saying, oh, what do I want to sell tonight? What do I want to taste? And it became about what the sommeliers wanted rather than what the guests wanted, which I found pretty harmful. The third thing is kind of the enforcement of education. I think we can all agree the level of knowledge in our industries is much higher today than it was even 10 years ago, which is an amazing thing. You can walk into, you know, I think you could probably walk into a lot of bars in this town and ask the bartender about the history of the Sazerac or Martinez, and they're going to know what's going on there, which is a really cool thing. But we should never assume that our guests want this knowledge or it's our job to impart it. If someone comes into Attica, they could just be wanting to have an easy evening with their friends, a private moment with a partner, and it's not my job to enforce education or even worse than that, kind of ideology on them. Relating to that, kind of, I saw technical jargon and kind of over information sort of seeping into our professional demeanor. You know, talking about a wine having moderate plus viscosity would be something we would do in a tasting group, but this really means very little to our guests. You know, I may know that an Australian Riesling tastes this certain way because of trimethyl dihydronaphthalene, but you really shouldn't be saying those words to a guest because it's confusing, it makes wine seem more pretentious, it really isn't hospitality forward. But as we kind of privileged this trivia, this knowledge in our kind of internal circles, it began infiltrating our professional demeanor towards guests. And the fifth way that I've really witnessed is people feeling more empowered to say no to the guest. So as we have gained more knowledge about the proper way to prepare and serve beverages, it can kind of be dangerous because, you know, I've had people ask me for ice cubes to put in their $1,000 bottle of Burgundy or Splenda to put in Krug. I've shaken Manhattans dozens of times. And, you know, obviously we all know these aren't the proper ways to serve these beverages, but, you know, this isn't my money, it's not my experience. If a guest comes into my restaurant and wants those things, then who am I to say no? So, you know, these things are mainly at the expense of hospitality, but I also have witnessed how they're really at the expense of financial accountability as well. ultimately, we all work for someone, even if it's ourselves in this industry, and we have to run a financially fit program. And if we're saying no to our guests, if we're creating lists that people don't really want to order off of, if we're not recommending wines that they like, this isn't serving the financial, the profitability of our programs. Witnessing all of these things, I really decided pretty early on that I was only going to study what I thought was relevant to my profession. And, so I did study some of those minimum must-weights of German Predikat levels, but really it was mainly to understand the different styles that were being made across the country. I learned a couple of the subzones of Vino Verde, but it was really just the important ones that you'd actually see on a wine label. And I did memorize every declared port vintage, but have promptly forgot all of that. I performed this heavy triage in my studying because I knew that if I didn't, I would really drive myself crazy trying to learn and memorize every single fact in the world of wine, and B, that I would lose sight of what was important about what we do. And I also had an impulse that perhaps this was also the trick to passing the exams, that if I could really focus on those facts that were relevant, that fed in commercially or qualitatively important wine regions, if I could really learn and truly understand all of those things, maybe that was the trick to passing, or not the trick, but that was the kind of the path to passing these exams. So in 2018, I took all 3 sections of the Master Sommelier exam, and I passed all 3 sections. As some of you may know, this did not last very long. About 5 weeks later, I got an email. It was a press release from the Court of Master Sommeliers. One of the proctors of the exam, a Master Sommelier, a member of the board, had sent an email the morning of the tasting exam revealing to a handful of people the identity of 2 of the wines on the tasting flight. And as a result, they decided to void everyone's exam. Everyone would have to retake it. Everyone who had been named a Master Sommelier was no longer. So this was important in that I really had to examine my motivations for taking the exam in the first place, to determine if I wanted to take it again. So when I sat down and thought about it, I really came to 2 main motivations, and one is community. Because we don't have this prescribed educational path, we all really have to come together as a community to build that curriculum, to build that education, much like we're doing today. And that, to me, is one of the greatest things about this industry, and I really found it in the Court of Master Sommeliers, and I love that about it. And the second thing really was the pursuit of excellence. But I realized I had redefined excellence for myself. And it was really not about kind of how much impressive information can I cram into my head. But, when I sat down and articulated kind of what excellence meant to me, I came up with 4 tenets. And the first is knowledge. Knowledge is and always will be incredibly important to what we do, and kind of as a proxy of that, education, both continual self-education as well as offering ourselves to others to educate. The second is passion. I do think we have to stay excited about what we study, what we teach. Or it doesn't mean much to the people we're reaching. And I think sometimes when we over-intellectualize things, there can be a capacity to diminish that passion. The third is financial accountability, which I've talked about. If we aren't financially accountable, this is a hobby, not a profession. And number 4 what was number 4? It's really important, I'm sure. Hospitality, which is very important. I've talked about a bunch. I think it really all comes down to hospitality, both in, obviously how we treat our guests, but how we treat each other, how we treat our employers, our colleagues, our suppliers, our purveyors. All of that kind of is in the same umbrella of hospitality. So when I, was examining whether I wanted to retake this exam, I really had to think about all 4 of these tenets, and would this be a choice that was feeding all 4 or privileging any one over the other? And when I kind of thought about it in those terms, and it really came down to, do I want this pin? Do I want these initials after my name? Or do those equate to excellence for me? And they really seemed meaningless in that context, and in fact, perhaps even detrimental to a continued pursuit of excellence. Because I think if you say, I've achieved this, I'm now a master, there's an inclination to stop pushing, to stop pursuing, and I think ultimately, that's what this industry is about, is just kind of continuing to push the boundaries and try to better ourselves. Thank you very much.